Hey guys, welcome to this week's FAQ in Freebie Friday. Now for those of you new to the channel, these videos are all about answering your health related questions. So if you have a question concerning your health in general, something regarding nutrition, Chinese medicine, herbalism, or really anything related to health and wellness, and you would like our help in answering that question, all you have to do is leave your question in the comment section below, and we'll be selecting those based on popularity. The questions that we feel will be most beneficial to the community as a whole, and of course the questions that we are capable of answering. Now something else really great about these videos is that every week from the comment section, we select one lucky person to win a free bag of tonic herbs or medicinal mushrooms of their choice. So even if you don't have a health related question for us this week, but you're interested in winning some free herbs, all you have to do to be entered to win is make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't yet already. Give this video a thumbs up and then just drop any comment in the comment section below. And with that out of the way, let's get to this week's questions. Alright, so getting to our first question. This one reads, what are your views on apple cider vinegar? Alright, so apple cider vinegar is considered to be the cure-all tonic, the remedy for all ailments in the health and wellness world. It's really one of those quintessential health and wellness remedies, or health foods, I should say, in the whole world that is health and wellness and nutrition that we are a part of. But I consider VitaJing to sort of be a renegade or rebel in the whole health and wellness world. We're sort of like the outlaws, I think, for one basic reason. And this is an observation that I've come to make over many years of studying this stuff, being in the health and wellness world since a very ripe age of about 10 years old, studying nutrition, is that most things that are considered healthy, the basic opposing viewpoints is that a lot of the quintessential health foods and health protocols all stem from an old physiological postulate or theory, which is that animals and humans with a slow metabolic rate have greater levels of longevity, meaning that they're going to live a lot longer than animals with the higher metabolic rate. Now, I'm not going to dive too deep into this, but this is something that I observe in the health and wellness world and why there's so much conflict. Because anywhere where you see a conflict, generally in the health and wellness world, it's because of these two opposing viewpoints at the root of them, again, whether you're aware of this or not. So I'm not going to dive too deep into dissecting those viewpoints. I mean, this is a great physiological war. This viewpoint has been argued for centuries, so I'm not going to try to be the one to win the war on this opposing viewpoint. But the basic way that I look at it and why I disagree with the idea, a lot of ideas in the health and wellness world, is because they're all about suppressing the metabolic rate, making your metabolic rate slower and slower and slower, so that way you can basically live off less energy. That's the whole idea of fasting. The whole idea of intermittent fasting. Those are the principles behind the carnivore diet, behind the keto diet in particular, and even behind any sort of calorie restricted diet. Oftentimes plant-based diets or vegan and vegetarian diets are all about less, how to survive on less, and that this is going to result in greater longevity. And the basic idea is, like, if you look at like a reptilian, which has a really, really low metabolic rate, they live forever, they live over 100 plus years or something. But one argument I make is that if you look at a lot of these animals, they're incredibly dormant. They hardly move. If you look at a lot of reptilians, especially if they live in places that are not warm all the time, if you look at a snake that lives in like a Midwestern climate, because it survives off very little energy, it hardly makes any energy and therefore hardly lives any life. And the whole idea that these animals live longer is not necessarily matter of fact. And if anything, if you were to probably dissect some of these numbers, and I'm just sort of, going off on a tangent here, but I would imagine that if there is any numbers on their longevity rates as a total sum, it's probably just because they die less frequently. An animal that's living under a rock for 6 months plus out of the year is significantly less likely to die via some predator or something. And there also happens to be plenty of animals in the wild with incredibly high metabolic rates, very fast metabolic rates that are constantly moving on the go. They eat a lot, they make a lot of energy, and they live very long. Take birds, for example. Many parrots have very high metabolic rates, and types of parrots and parakeets, and they live over 100 years as well. So I'm not going to dissect that any further, but my point here, because I want to share a little bit of background research on apple cider vinegar, is that apple cider vinegar belongs more or less to a class of like metabolic suppressing supplements, if you will. So it has some properties that have nothing to do with its metabolic suppressing effects. So for example, it can act like a bitter agent. It can act as a digestive tonic just by acidifying the pH of the stomach or something. It can sort of stimulate the vagus nerve by being bitter and astringent in taste. But the basic thing that I disagree with apple cider vinegar is its high production of lactic acid. So lactic acid is a stress substance. It's the substance that your metabolism makes when it's stressed out and it can't produce enough carbon dioxide and ATP. So when you're in stress metabolism, let's say like glycolysis, you're producing only 2 ATP and lactic acid as a byproduct. Think of exercise where your muscles are burning on fire, your legs are on fire from running. That's lactic acid as a byproduct of that stress of long distance running or something. So every sort of cancer is associated with elevated levels of lactic acid. In fact, around the 1920s or 30s, the basic way that doctors would test for cancer and to see if you were precancerous would be to just measure your carbon dioxide to lactic acid ratios. Higher lactic acid generally meant cancer or precancerous concerns because cancer cells and tumors thrive in an acidic environment, and lactic acid makes the extracellular environment very acidic where cancer cells grow. Whereas carbon dioxide is more so alkalizing. So that's the basic reason I don't really recommend apple cider vinegar or any fermented foods that contain an abundance of lactic acid, because lactic acid is truly a stress substance. It's what your body produces when it can't oxidize glucose. In other words, when your metabolism is being suppressed. In fact, if we look at some studies here on whether or not vinegar boosts the metabolism or slows it, what was found is that vinegar appears to be effective at suppressing the speed at which glucose enters the blood, and with that lowers peak glucose and insulin secretion. If measured acutely, this is a large 31 to 40% decrease in blood glucose levels. But after 120 minutes, overall exposure is the same. It is a slowing effect, not a reducing effect. That being said, this slowing may be beneficial for improving insulin sensitivity in diabetics. So this slowing may be due to the acetic acid being able to slow gastric stomach emptying rates. This has been shown with regular vinegar as well as apple cider vinegar. So a lot of what is stated there is sort of contradictory and confusing, right? And again, this has a lot to do with the great conflict between having a slower or a faster metabolism. But to sort of translate what it's saying here is that apple cider vinegar and vinegar in general actually slows the rate of glucose oxidation, which may have a beneficial effect on insulin, of course, but the general suppressing of blood glucose levels is a stress, and it's a sign of a stressed or a slowed metabolism. Remember, as blood glucose levels drop, the basic response is a stress response. Low blood sugar is the basic physiological stressor. It's what initiates every chain reaction of stress in the body. When you're stressed out in any way, your blood sugar levels plummet and cortisol and adrenaline rise. So this might not necessarily be a good thing. And although it might regulate insulin levels, it's not the smart way to regulate insulin levels. There are plenty of ways to keep insulin levels in check without having to suppress blood glucose level. It's a solution to a problem, in other words, that will make a new problem. And that new problem is probably going to be a lot worse than the short-term problem being solved. But the basic thing that we're concluding from this study is that apple cider vinegar does indeed suppress the metabolism as a slowing effect on the rate of oxidation of glucose. And it even goes to say that it has a slowing effect on the digestion, actually. So I think overall, if you were to look at all the various long-term effects of constant consumption of something like apple cider vinegar, especially taking like 2 shots of it every single day, there's probably going to be more negative effects than short-term beneficial effects. So I think there are smarter ways to achieve everything you'd want to achieve through apple cider vinegar. So if you were to take, for example, a look at weight loss, your better route for healthy weight loss is to optimize thyroid function, decrease stress levels, regulate the blood sugar, not suppress it. You know, there's a lot healthier and smarter ways to lose weight than trying to rely on something like apple cider vinegar alone. So it depends on really what you're trying to achieve with the apple cider vinegar. Figure out what problems you would like to solve with it. You know, if it's digestion, what I see generally people want to solve digestive issues with it. It is going to acidify the stomach, which is going to be beneficial. But there are other beneficial ways to improve digestion, again, without having to necessarily rely on that. However, with that being said, if you want to use it for those sorts of purposes, I just wouldn't go necessarily crazy with this stuff. You know, like don't take an insane amount of it. Have maybe 1 tablespoon of it in a carrot salad or something to cleanse the bowels out, to improve digestion. But other than that, it's probably not going to be something that you're going to want to overconsume and consume for too long of a period of a time. So again, it just depends on the problem you're trying to solve. If you're trying to solve weight loss issues or weight gain issues, if you're trying to solve digestive issues, then there's other ways to do that. Definitely check out my online wellness academy for resources there. Otherwise, hopefully this answers your question. All right, so getting to our second question. This one reads, are there any herbs to help with nighttime urination? So I have a couple of different tips, and I'm actually going to recommend that you watch this video here for a variety of different tips, because the frequent urination is likely due to spikes in adrenaline, which tend to occur at night when the blood sugar drops. As I was saying in the last question, if your blood sugar or glycogen levels get too low, this can trigger a stress response. It can cause cortisol and adrenaline to rise. And what adrenaline tends to do is stimulate the production of aldosterone. And together, aldosterone and adrenaline use up the sodium, the potassium, and other minerals in the body or the kidney system, which would regulate fluid metabolism. And it can cause you to urinate excessively, which can cause you to become dehydrated in a sense. So this is how excessive stress can lead to dehydration through stimulating adrenaline and aldosterone, which might stimulate an urge to urinate and also deplete those minerals. So considering it's likely a spike in adrenaline and aldosterone that occurs around nighttime, keep in mind, nighttime is when your body starts to detoxify and go into a more catabolistic state. So in a sense, the nighttime can be stressful. So you can mitigate a lot of the stressful effects of what occurs in your body during the night by doing something as simple as taking a 1/4 teaspoon of salt before bed. This will actually suppress the production of adrenaline and aldosterone. It'll prevent that adrenaline and aldosterone spike, and that should help you hold on to your water more efficiently rather than having this urge to eliminate it. So that's usually the case when there's excessive urination. But if what you're referring to is this constant urge to urinate, more like a frequent urination as opposed to just needing to go at nighttime, then that could be indicative of inflammation in the smooth muscle throughout the urinary tract. So if it's more systemic, as the person commented below, you could try supplementing with nettle root. So over the long term, that has powerful anti-inflammatory effects. It's specifically a tonic to the urinary tract and bladder, so it can help with any inflammation that might be causing frequent urges to urinate. But it sounds to me more like you're referring to just I need to go to the bathroom at night. This is something I've experienced, on and off, a couple of different times throughout my life. And I've noticed that it's during times where I've exercised too late in the night and then didn't get the right nutrition after or something. So sometimes correcting it very simply with, again, salt, getting in good sugar intake near bedtime too. So taking a tablespoon of raw honey with salt on it would be a really good idea. And if you want to have some sort of tonic, try mixing some good quality milk of choice, add in some honey, a pinch of salt, and a little bit of nettle root extract powder. Blend that up and take that before bed, and that should help in every aspect you could think of. All right, so let's answer one third and final question. This one reads, what if dairy is 100% grass-fed but ultra-pasteurized? Is it still good? Raw milk is hard to find. Thank you. So I'm not sure exactly where you live, but I'm pretty sure that there's 1 or 2 brands of milk that you can find typically in Whole Foods or health food stores like Sprouts or other farmer market type stores. That is the brand Kelowna, I believe it's pronounced, and that is a vat pasteurized product, which means that it only goes up to, I believe, 145 degrees of heat. So it's very similar to, what was done back in the old day by the Amish people. So they didn't pasteurize their stuff. They didn't also consume it entirely raw all the time. What they would do sometimes is they would bring it to a very slow boil. So they just kind of warm it up or heat it up on the stove very slowly. This still preserves the integrity of the proteins and the fats and a lot of the other micronutrients, and to a certain case, even beneficial bacteria, enzymes, etc. So vat pasteurized, VAT or batch pasteurized, sometimes it's referred to, is the way to go, ideally. The problem with ultra-pasteurized is that I've read, at least through various different studies and through my experience too, with trying to consume something that's raw, batch pasteurized and pasteurized is that I do tend to notice that I don't digest it as effortlessly as the vat pasteurized or the raw stuff. So basically the issue is that once you ultra-pasteurize something, it's being extremely high heated and there's tons and tons of pressure on it, which can cause denaturing to the proteins. It can damage the fat structure to a certain degree, and the destruction of enzymes that are otherwise naturally occurring that help you break down the lactose and the proteins that are in that milk. So of course, the ultra pasteurized stuff is more highly heated, there's more pressure, more stress on the milk, and it could result in a lower quality milk. So long story short, it's not necessarily the ideal, but is it optimum? Is it an optimal choice for you? That's something that is entirely subjective. You know, there's so many benefits to consuming good quality milk, getting in the calcium, ensuring a high calcium to phosphorus ratio, a lot of the fat soluble vitamins, getting in good, easy to digest proteins, healthy fats, good calories. You know, these are all things that are really important, you know, especially just keeping the high calcium to phosphorus ratio. Unless you're consuming eggshell powder or tons and tons of cooked leafy greens, which might cause digestive issues, it's otherwise really difficult to get good quality calcium. So if you have no other options, if this is really your only option, then, you know, I would say go for it and just see how you digest it. You might digest it perfectly fine, but I'd be more concerned about the potential estrogens in that milk. I'd also be concerned about potential contaminants, so toxins, added synthetic hormones. Again, if they're eating a diet rich in grains and other polyunsaturated fats with estrogen in them, that's likely going to be more aggravating and inflammatory to your body than if you were to get something that's, you know, really clean, good quality grass-fed dairy that's just been pasteurized. So my point is there's a couple of different things to look at, and at the end of the day, you just want to make an optimal choice, meaning that it has more benefits. The benefits outweigh any potential harm or damage. So obviously one thing to look at is, you know, is it pasteurized? Is it batch or vat pasteurized? Is it raw? All things to consider. As long as it's non-homogenized and it's ultra pasteurized, you know, that might be some benefit right there in of itself. So ideally it's both non-pasteurized and non-homogenized, but at the very least, as long as it's non-homogenized too, that might make it a bit easier on the digestive system. Other things, again, you want to look out for. Is it organic? So, you know, you said it's 100% grass-fed. I think consuming grass-fed dairy over organic, raw, grain-fed dairy, you know, it might be better to consume pasteurized grass-fed dairy than it would be to consume grain-fed raw dairy, especially if it's eating grains that are being sprayed with estrogenic herbicides and pesticides. So these are all things to consider. I think at the end of the day, just try to weigh your options. Is it generally healthier than it is not healthy? If the only thing that's really wrong with it is that it's pasteurized, I say give it a go. See if you can digest it. If you can digest it, great, you know, you're in the clear. If you're not having any reactions to it, sinus issues or signs of inflammation, then I would say continue to consume it. You know, also keep in mind that a lot of the times if you're not digesting dairy, it's because there's a bacterial imbalance in the small intestine. The bacterial endotoxins can suppress lactase production via the pancreas. So these are things to consider. It's probably more important that you can digest your dairy and that it's free of toxins and estrogenic substances. The only real issue with the pasteurization is for some people, it can make it harder for you to digest. So I would say that if your digestive system's strong, and if it's grass-fed, organic dairy, you're probably safe to give it a try. And one last thing I just want to quickly mention, just in case you're not aware of this website, but there's a website and it shows you a list of basically every grass-fed, raw, organic, pasture-raised beef farmer and dairy farmer in your local area and in your state. If you live in the United States, at least, there's likely dairy within 2 hours of you. You might just have to drive and buy a lot of it at once and go like once a week. Otherwise, if you're in Canada, it's a lot more difficult to get raw dairy there. You'd have to find like a secret connection of some sorts. And other places I'm not as aware of. I know in France, you can buy it anywhere. So it really depends on where you live. But hopefully all this has provided you with some help. I would say at the end of the day, just experiment with it. Experimentation is going to be the fastest way to know the truth about whether this stuff is good for you or not. All right, guys, that brings this week's FAQ and Freebie Friday to a close. Now remember, every week in these videos, we give away some free herbs and mushrooms to one lucky person. If you want to be that lucky person, all you have to do to be entered to win is make sure you give this video a thumbs up. Give it a thumbs up anyways if you've enjoyed it, and if you're not interested in winning herbs, subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't yet already. And of course, if you're interested in learning more, we have over 500 videos here on the channel. We have hundreds of blog posts on our website, and we have an entire tonic herb shop that you can visit online. You can learn more about the various herbs we talk about and recommend. You can find all of this stuff in the description box below.